Welcome to the 1960s Project. Starting in January of this year, we've been exploring voices of the 1960s. Our live tonight is show number 20 for our second season. So it's season 2, show 20. The goal of Voices of the 1960s is to share our thoughts and perspectives from those of us who have lived through the 1960s, some part of the 1960s. Starting in February of this year, we launched a series, and the title of that series is Conversations Across Generations. In tonight's show, we will be continuing that theme, but before I introduce my guests, I have 5 asks of you. The first ask is to like and follow us on Facebook. That's ask number 1. Ask number 2 is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Ask number 3 is to read and comment on the blogs on our website. And since this is social media, ask number 4 is to share our shows, videos, and blogs. Here's my 5th ask, and this is a very important one. Now, join us next Tuesday for June 8th. June 8th is the first anniversary of What's on Jerome's Mind. And to commemorate that, we're going to hold our second virtual dance party. The theme is the groove line. We want you to come and rattle, rock, and roll your hips. Our dance master or mistress or leader is Maria Broom. She joined us in December earlier, and she will be leading us in movement on this coming Tuesday, June 8th. We're celebrating our first anniversary of What's on Jerome's Mind. Again, like and follow us on Facebook, subscribe to our YouTube channel, read and comment on our blogs, share our shows, videos, and blogs, and join us next Tuesday, the 8th of June, for our virtual dance party. Before we bring up the guest, I want to let you know that we'll be talking about conversations across generations. And the 1960s ended, obviously, in the year 1969. So we'll be asking our guests to start today in 2021 and look back 52 years to see how their lives have unfolded and what advice they can give. Our interviewer is Judith Winston, and we can bring Judy up, and she will be interviewing her cousin, Hassan Bilal. So welcome, Judy, and welcome, Hassan.
Thank you, Jerome. I am delighted to have this opportunity to interview my cousin, Hassan Bilal, and to learn even more about him than I currently know. You're right, it has been 52 years since the 1960s ended at the end of 1969. A lot has happened, and I think it would be very helpful, even though we're cousins, Hassan, for you to share with the participating audience something about yourself, your background, and anything else you think we should know as we have this exploration of your topic and your life and your relationship with your children and grandchildren.
Well, thank you very much, Judy. And thank you, Jerome, for inviting me to come on this forum and impart whatever I can of my memories from the 1960s. And I feel incredibly blessed. As you mentioned, it's 52 years. So I feel incredibly blessed to still be here, to be quite honest with you, especially coming through the 1960s, which in my case was probably the most turbulent decade of my life. And so, again, I am blessed to have been able to come through that. And in the journey that I've been on. I have a wonderful family. I have a beautiful, supportive wife. I have 3 great children, and I have 5 fantastic grandchildren. And I would like to address my conversation today as a conversation to my grandchildren. The things that I'm going to say about growing up in the 1960s that I'd like my grandchildren to know, I believe I'd like to feel that my children already know. Because one of the things that I've always have tried to do over the years, especially when they were young and as they were growing up, I wanted to communicate to them. I wanted to be very communicative with them so that I could be part of their life and give them direction as they were growing. The picture that you just showed was 2 of my children, Rashad, Bilal, and Tahira Bridges. They are part of our company. We have a company called the Bilal Group. And the one son that is not there is Hassan Bilal, who I tried to get into the Bilal Group, and I still may have some success to do that. But he is a very successful basketball coach and has been one for many years. Rashad is a financial advisor and is right now taking that particular platform to a very successful level as a podcast originator and an online school, the EYL University, and he's doing some tremendous things with that. And Tahira is the mother of 2 of my grandchildren, Lamar, who is the oldest, he's 22 years old, and Blessing, who is the youngest, she is 6 years old. And in between Lamar and Blessing, I have Issa, who is 17 years old and is about to graduate from high school in another couple of weeks. And then I have Nasir, who is Rashad's son, and he's 10 years old. And he's almost, well, I was not going to say he's almost as big as his dad, but he's getting there, and his dad is 6'3". And then I have Ali, who is 8 years old, and is just a fantastic, intelligent young man. And so those are the 5 that I have. And so I'd like to gear my conversation to them and to try to give them some wisdom, if I have any, that can help them as they chart their life going forward.
That sounds great, Hassan. And I'm curious to know what led you to think about the advice you would want to give to your grandchildren at this point. They are very different in age, going from the youngest, I think you said 6, up to 22.
Yes.
And I'm curious to know a couple of things, and you can add to this as you wish. Would your advice to the oldest of your grandchildren at this point be different from that which you will share with your youngest again at this point?
Well, it would be somewhat different. It would be somewhat different, but in the overall scheme of things, it would be the same. And the advice goes like this. You know, there's an old saying that all of us have heard before, that youth is oftentimes wasted on the young. And so I like to think that in my life, in the 1960s, as a teenager, in the 1960s, that particular adage applied to me 100%. Because everything that I should have done, or what people would think that you should do during those formative years, I did the opposite. I went the opposite direction. So those of you who know about the 1960s and what took place in the 1960s, it was a very trying time. It was a trying time in our country. It was a trying time for African Americans, and it was a trying time for people who were growing up in the 1960s. It was a rebellious period of time where a lot of us just totally rebelled against what we call the system, and rebelled against what we thought was counterproductive to our lives. and we went in different directions and experimented with a lot of different things that were really detrimental to our lives. And as I mentioned earlier, I feel incredibly blessed that I'm still here to talk about these things, because I know many people, many people that I grew up with in that period of time that are not here and left far too early. So,
you know, I know that my Aunt Dot, your mother, and Uncle Howard, your father, were very attentive to you and your sister as you were growing up. But I suspect that as you've talked, that there were some things that they may have said to you that didn't quite take. And so, and so I wonder what they could have said that would have turned, even in those turbulent times, turned you around a bit. And what would you say? And what did you say to your children? And what would you say to your grandchildren specifically that you hope would take for them to lead the kind of life that you would love for them to have?
well, you're absolutely right, Judy. I had fantastic parents. My mother, Dorothy, was an educator, and she was brilliant. She won, they grew up in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and she won a full scholarship to NYU as a result of an oratorical contest that they had at the high school that she went to, Atlantic City High School. And one of the people who were one of the judges of the contest was Dorothy Height. And my mother won first place in that particular contest, and the prize was a full scholarship to, I believe it was the school of your choice, and she chose NYU. And she was very influenced by Dorothy Height because they had the same name. Dorothy Height was Dorothy Irene Height, and my mother's name was Dorothy Irene Goodman at the time. And so Dorothy Height actually became one of her mentors. And so she came to New York to go to school at NYU and did fantastic there. And my father grew up in Atlantic City also, and he came to New York as well, following his sweetheart to New York. And he worked in several different jobs before he settled into the profession of being a mortician. And he worked at one of the, actually, it was the largest Black-owned funeral home in New York City, and probably perhaps throughout the nation at that time, which was Unity Funeral Home.
Right.
And
now,
so
was that I'm sorry, Hassan, just to interrupt. Was that a picture of you and your parents that was just on the screen?
Yes, that was, I believe, that was at my high school graduation from Palmer Memorial Institute in Sedalia, North Carolina. And they were both down there for my graduation in 1969. Yes, that's it. That's at the Palmer Memorial Institute. And so, yeah, my parents, again, I've been blessed all my life. My parents were extremely good examples of great parents. The one regret that I have, and it was no fault of his own, but my father wasn't a talker. He was a worker. My mother was more of the talker. And so my mother would tell me all the time what I was doing wrong and why I should not do what I was doing. And my father would just be working. He actually established three of the branches of the Unity Funeral Home in New York City, two in the Bronx and one out in Brooklyn. And so he was constantly working. And I remember on a couple of occasions, I accompanied him to work. There he is. Yes, that was Howard Day Sharp. Yes. And he was sharp. He was a sharp guy. So I remember a couple of occasions I went with him to work, and one in particular, which really, when I think about it and when I tell people about it, it's incredibly funny. I was a little child. I probably was about the age of my young grandson Ali, about 8 years old or so. And so I went with him one day down to Unity Funeral Home, 126th Street, 8th Avenue in Harlem. And he was in the basement embalming a body, and I was watching it. I don't know why he thought I wanted to watch that, but I guess he wanted to show me what he did. So I'm watching him do this. And what I found out later was that the person that, and I hope this doesn't really upset or turn off any of the audience, but the person that was being embalmed had an autopsy. And for those of you who don't know, when a person has an autopsy, in a hospital, they take out all of their organs and they take out their brain and everything, and then they examine it, and then they put it back in, and they put it back in the chest cavity. They don't put it back where it necessarily came from. So anyway, he was opening up the skull of this particular person. And then when he opened up the skull, he pulled out a whole lot of newspaper and cotton out of this person's skull. And I was just totally amazed by that. And I said, Daddy, is that how people learn how to read? They have newspapers in this. And so he explained to me the whole process of the autopsy. And so once again, I mean, this is not a pleasant subject, so I hope that I didn't turn anybody off. But that's a lasting memory that I have.
But is that when you learned you did not want to be a mortician?
I think that was the seed that was planted at that particular time, that's not what I want to do.
Okay, so that was at least one influence that your father had on you.
Yes. Well, he had several influences. As I said, he was a major worker. He would work all of the time. But unfortunately, he wasn't one that would talk. He didn't have time. He wasn't around to give me the kind of conversation that I would have liked to have had, and maybe tell me some things that I needed at the time. He was constantly working, trying to provide for his family, and you certainly can't fault him for that. So I tried to be, as a father, I tried to always be in my children's lives as best I could, and have conversations with them and talk to them, and try to give them whatever kind of knowledge I could give them at the time to help them make the right choices going forward and as they were growing up. Have them always involved. With my sons, I always had them involved in sports. They enjoyed sports, and it was a healthy activity. And I always knew at the end of the day, when they came home, they were too tired to do anything else. They didn't have any time to go out and get involved in anything they shouldn't have, because they were just too tired from playing basketball and football and just doing those things constantly. And for my daughter, she was always involved in cheerleading and different things. So, I'd like to think that I was able to give them the kind of information that I would like to give to my grandchildren at this point in their life.
So talk to us, I guess, a bit more specifically about how you talk to them and what it is you are saying to them about as they're thinking about their lives and their future. I know that you've indicated, of course, the importance of being active and involved in a number of things like sports. What else have you shared with them that you hope will influence them both now and in later life?
Well, again, going back to the 60s was a turbulent time. A lot of drugs around, and drugs is something that I experienced when I was a teenager, and it really was a detriment in my life. It was a detriment in the lives of those around me, all of my friends and different people that I associated with. It was a big problem. It was an epidemic. If for those of you who are of our age, remember that in the 1960s, it was an epidemic of drugs. And living in the New York area, it was like being in the epicenter of the epidemic. And so there was a lot of that kind of stuff that went on, and a lot of the different residual effects of that kind of lifestyle took place. So I tried to tell my children, listen, I got caught up in that kind of thing, and a lot of different things that I went through and experienced that I didn't want them to experience. So I told them, just keep your eyes on the prize, more or less. Stay focused on what you're doing. Do what you need to do. I love the phrase from the movie The Great Debaters, when what was the brother's name?
Denzel Washington, was
Well,
it?
it was Denzel, and it was the other brother who's very prominent now. Anyway, he told his son, he said, "Listen, do what you have to do, so you can do what you want to do." And that's a phrase that I use right to today. Take care of your business. Do what you have to do, so you do what you have to do, so you can do what you want to do. Right? So don't waste that time. Don't get involved in a whole lot of foolishness. And for us as African American men in particular, a lot of these roadblocks, I believe, are set up on purpose. A lot of these things, and it's the same way today. A lot of these things are set up on purpose to detract you and detour you from being your greatest self. You can't accomplish what God wants you to accomplish if you're constantly bogged down in foolishness and chasing after a lot of materialistic type things and things that you think are important, but are not really important in the grand scheme of things. So I tried to always give them that kind of direction. And I thank God that it worked, because my children have turned out to be fantastic young people and adults now. They're great fathers. Tahira is a great mother. And so I thank God that I was able to steer them in that direction. So I'd like to be able to do the same thing for my grandchildren and tell them, stay focused on the good things in this life. Stay focused on the things that are going to help you grow and develop spiritually, mentally, and physically. We all need physical things. We all like to have money and be able to do the things that we'd like to do that money can buy. But at the same time, keep your moral character and keep your moral strength, and nurture and develop your intelligence and your spirituality, and stay on the straight path. We as Muslims say the Siratul Mustaqim, which is the straight path. Oh Allah, please keep us on the Siratul Mustaqim. Stay on that straight path. Don't veer too much to the left or too much to the right. Stay on that straight path. And if you fall off, which you will do from time to time, just make sure that you get back on that straight path and keep moving forward. So that's my advice to them, based on my experiences in my younger life. And like I said, I believe that, I've said it a few times already, but I'm incredibly blessed to be here to express these things, because there are too many people that were intelligent, people that had great promise, much more so than I did, in my opinion. And they're not here. People that, young guys and young ladies as well, who died from drug overdoses and all kinds of foolishness that was related to that they had happened to them in their lives. And these were just young African Americans that were taken off of the scene way too early. And I want to try to make sure that my children are not, or my grandchildren at this point, do not fall victim to that kind of thing.
Thank you. A bit of an aside, Hassan, you mentioned your father's name, Howard Sharp, Uncle Howard, and your name is Hassan Bilal. Could you talk to us a little bit about that transition for you?
Yes, absolutely. Well, as I mentioned, the 60s was a horror show in terms of my behavior. I did go to Palmer Memorial Institute, which I will elaborate on in a few moments. But coming out of the 1960s and in the early 70s, truly one of the things that saved my life, I do not hesitate to say that, is that I became a member of the Nation of Islam in 1972. And the discipline and the right thinking in terms of taking care of myself and my moral character that my parents always tried to give me, that I rebelled against, basically, because they said it. When I heard it from somebody else, it attracted me. It attracted me, and as a result of that, I was able to leave the life of foolishness and just disaster, heading down a disastrous path, and I became a Muslim. And as a result of becoming a Muslim, I changed my name because one of the beliefs of the Nation of Islam and one of the beliefs of the greater Islamic community, especially us as African Americans, actually it's really a part of our culture more so than anyone else, because we all know, we should know, that the names that we carry, Howard Sharp, James Smith, Donald Johnson, all of those names came from slave masters. Perhaps not the first names, probably the first names, but more than likely 100% of the time, these names came from a slave master. So if you want to be, in my opinion, if you want to be a free person, a free man, a free woman, and you want to go back to your original roots, which I think, our young cousin Gina has done a fantastic job with African Ancestry, taking us back to our ancestry in Africa. We have to go back to adopting the names, or as close to the names as we could, of our ancestors, and free ourselves from these names that we have gotten from the slave master. So my father's name was Howard Sharp Sr., and my name was Howard Sharp Jr. And so when I became aware and woke, as they say now, I became woke to the knowledge of myself and my ancestors and who we truly are. I decided to change my name. So I changed my name to Sultan Hassan Bilal. And one of the things that I love about these names is that they have meaning. When you have a name, and I'm not disparaging anybody, but most of the time when you hear a name like John Smith or Joe Williams or whatever, and you ask them, what does that mean? Very seldom can people tell you what it means. They say, well, that's the name that my parents gave me, or, my grandparents, it's just a name. It doesn't say anything about who you are or who you aspire to be. So as Muslims, we chose names that meant something to us and what we aspired to be or be like. So I chose the name Sultan, which means an Islamic king. And I chose the name Hassan, which means one who improves and beautifies. And then I chose the name Bilal. So as I mentioned, Sultan means Islamic king. Hassan means one who improves and beautifies. And Bilal was an African companion of the prophet, the great prophet Muhammad. And he was an Ethiopian. And he was also the first prayer caller, or as we say, the muezzin, which is the Arabic name for the prayer caller in the religion of Islam. And so he did a fantastic job, and he has a great history, and he was a very close companion to the Prophet Muhammad. So when I was searching for a name that I could try to live up to, I chose those three names. Now, as time has gone on, and as you see, and as everyone calls me, it's just Hassan, because people would not say Sultan right. They would always say Sultan. Oh, Sultan, how are you doing? It's not Sultan, it's Sultan. It's, it's a language thing. But in any event, I say, okay, just call me Hassan. If you find Sultan hard to say, say Hassan. So that was the explanation for that.
Okay.
And I know that this was a hard thing for my family to understand as I made that change. But once I explained to them what I'm explaining to you now, they accepted it and they could see it, and they were okay with that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It's a very instructive lesson, I think, for us all. And I'm thinking, as I've heard you speak about your life and your family, that your life itself, your actions have really conveyed a message to your children and grandchildren that perhaps goes beyond words. I know you've given them good advice using words, but also through your example, which is a very, very important thing for all of us to remember, to that how we act, what we do is often as important as what we have to say. I'm also reminded, or it occurs to me, I should say, as I've heard you speak, Hassan, that we've seen a lot of activity among African American young people and other young people in recent months as they seek racial and social justice in this country. It's been very inspiring in many ways. I'm wondering if you think we have anything to learn from them, so that maybe it goes the other way. So that what do the young people today, particularly those who are most active in the effort to secure social and racial justice, is there anything that occurs to you that you think is an important lesson from those young folks, especially in our community? And by that, I mean the African American community.
Well, I would say this, Judy, that it has always been the young people who have stepped up for the most part. And I see it now the same as it was in the 60s. If you remember in the 60s, when we were all young, you had the civil rights movement really coming into great fruition. You had those who were in the nonviolent group of folks. You had those who were in the more militant era or more militant camp with the Black Panthers. And a lot of people would say that the at the time, as we were called, Black Muslims fit into that same category. But we were all young then. So when I see these young people out here now, it reminds me of how young people were back in the 1960s. I don't think that they're doing anything different than what we did. And I love it. I love that their voices are still strong and that they are not going to take it anymore. All of this police brutality and all of this covert, and now it's appearing as it's becoming more overt racism that we are experiencing in our society. But it's great to know that the young people are always at the forefront. As I mentioned, the 60s, same way. And in coming up through the years, and now at the present time, young people are out there doing the best that they can in terms of making sure that people understand that Black Lives Matter and that, we need equality all the way across the board. So what that tells me is that the struggle is just that. It's a struggle. It's not one and done. It wasn't over after the 60s. It wasn't over, after the Jim Crow laws were struck down in terms of law. It's not over since we've had, the first Black president in the United States. It's not over. It's an ongoing struggle. And as you can see, the other camp is trying to turn back the clock. They're trying to now have voter suppression laws that are, couched in all of these subtle words, but it's the same thing. It's not going out and lynching people overtly like they did and just massacring people like they did in Tulsa 100 years ago. Now they massacre you in terms of the wealth gap. They massacre you in terms of trying to keep you from voting who you need to vote for to make sure that we have fair laws on the book. So it's a different kind of war now. It's not as overt as it used to be, but it's still there. And the struggle continues. And we have to be cognizant of that and support these young people all the way across the board, and say that we're with you. We may not be out there marching with you anymore, but we're there with you and we support you 100%. So that's how I feel about that.
Thank you for that. It is very inspiring to hear you recognize the the similarities, I guess is what I'm trying to say, between the areas, the era that we grew up in and what our children and grandchildren are growing up in now. One of the things that you mentioned was the issue of the wealth gap. And I know that in your own profession, you have been working to help others understand how they can handle their finances and their to build wealth. And I know one of your sons who's in the business with you has been very active in helping young people understand financial wealth building and what they need to know about money. And I think his business is Earn Your Leisure. Am I right about that?
Yes.
And so that lesson you have shared with him, and he's taking it forward, and he will one day have his own children to help educate in that area. Do you want to talk just a bit about that aspect of advice sharing and the importance of what you do and what your son and daughter are doing with you in the business?
Well, yes, absolutely. You're 100% right, Judy. One of the things that we learned in my early experience with the Nation of Islam was to do for self. Create your own businesses, create your own economy, create your own schools. And I'd like to think that I've always had that kind of mentality from the time I was a young child. I remember when I was just about 8 years old, maybe 7 years old, I actually had my first job. And I used to go with my mother to the hair salon that she used to go to in the Bronx. We lived in the Bronx. And I asked the lady that ran the hair salon, could I have a job? And she said, yeah, you could have a job. You can clean up the hair, sweep up the hair, and what have you on the floor after they finish giving people haircuts and treating their hair. And so I learned a trick back then that I guess is probably still apropos to today. When you're sweeping up hair, it's good to put, back then we used to have cloth diapers. You remember the cloth diapers, but you could use any kind of cloth. You put that on the broom, so as you're sweeping, the hair doesn't fly all over the place. If you just use the broom by itself and you start to sweep, all you're doing is just moving the hair, and it gets up in the air and it moves from one spot to the other. So if you use the cloth diaper or a piece of cloth, you pin it to the broom and sweep, now the hair will stay in one place and you can pick it up easier. So that was my first job. My second job, I was about maybe 9 years old, still living in the Bronx, and a friend of mine and myself used to sell what was called then color tone Christmas cards. These were Christmas cards that were made for Black folks way back in 1958 or whatever it was, 58 or 59. And we would go. I remember this like it was yesterday. They used to make these cards in a town called Mount Vernon, New York, which from where I lived in the Bronx was just a train ride away. And we would take the train, go up there, walk into Mount Vernon, go to this factory and buy these cards, and then come back home, and we would sell it to the neighbors and to our friends and to our families. And they were nice cards. They were beautiful cards. So that was my introduction to entrepreneurship. So I think, everything has a destiny base to it. So as I grew older and I did become a member of the Nation of Islam, and one of the things that attracted me, I think a lot, if not the most, was the fact that, we wanted to create our own businesses. We wanted to create our own economy and do for self in regards to economics. One of the things that I've seen over the years, going back, to my mother's experience and to all of we have had some great professionals in our community. We have had great teachers. We have had great professors. We have had doctors, many, many doctors, but we have not had that many. We've had some, but we have not had that many business people who have established really multi-million-dollar businesses. We have a number of them now, and the number is constantly growing. So one of the things that I did was I actually kind of stumbled into the career of financial planning when I was about 25 years old, I guess, about 25, 26 years old. A friend of mine was working for an insurance company, and he told me, man, you could make a lot of money doing this. And at the time I needed to do something. So I went to check it out, and I've been doing that ever since. And we've expanded from just the insurance business to financial advisory and financial planning. And I, again, wanted to always have my own company. So I formed my own company, the Bilal Group, which is a financial advisory firm. And as you mentioned, I brought in my son, Rashad. I brought in my daughter, Tahira. She is our executive assistant. I tried to bring my son, Hassan, in, but he is really focused on his profession of being a basketball coach. And he's an excellent basketball coach from the youth all the way up to college. And so we have the Bilal Group, which is a financial advisory firm. And my son, Rashad, has taken it in another direction, or has grown it actually in the direction of financial literacy. If you remember, financial literacy is something that was never taught in school. At least it wasn't taught to us. You know, you have kids in high school that don't know how to reconcile a checkbook, and it was never taught. You know, we had home economics and woodshop, you know, but never had financial literacy. So his platform, which is Earn Your Leisure, he has a podcast called Earn Your Leisure. They speak to financial literacy. And actually now it is one of the top financial literacy and business podcasts in the world. And they also have an online university, which is called EYL University, where they teach master classes on all types of subjects, from cryptocurrency to how to get a mortgage, investing. So he's done a fantastic job. He really has done a fantastic job, and I'm very proud of him, as I am of all of my children.
Well, that's wonderful. Of course, you know, Hassan is doing his part, mentoring all those young basketball players.
Absolutely.
And I suspect he is also helping them understand that there is life beyond basketball, but that is a skill that will show them what they can do with their bodies and also with their minds, because it does take some intelligence to be able to play well and effectively. So.
Yes, he does. He mentors these kids. He mentors kids from young ages on up to college. And he always impresses upon them that they need to be good students as well as good athletes. Because as we all know, you know, kids love sports, adults love sports, and kids especially always want to aspire to be a professional athlete. They think they could be a professional basketball player, a professional football player, a professional tennis player. They all want to do that. The majority of them want to do that. And the reality is that there's a very small number that will actually do that.
Right.
And so, you know, if you can teach young people, which Hassan does, from an early age, that they need to be excellent students and do the best they can in school, so that when it's time to stop playing football and basketball, they have many options open to them in whatever field of endeavor they are prepared for. But the basic thing is that they need to be prepared. You know, there's another old adage. I got a lot of old adages. There's old adage that says that luck actually is when preparation meets opportunity.
Yeah.
That is luck. You know, you need to be prepared so that when an opportunity presents itself to you, you can take advantage of it. And some people may say, oh, he was lucky or she was lucky. But no, I prepared for this and the opportunity opened up. And so therefore I was able to take advantage of it.
Right. Well, that's great. Let me take this opportunity, Hassan, to ask those who are joining us to ask any questions they may have for you as we get towards the end of this program. It's interesting to me that there have been a number of comments, by the way, which I think you will be able to see after we end this. Comments basically saying people agree with things that you are saying and appreciate them. I was thinking of, you talked about the cards, the greeting cards that used to go to Mount Vernon to get. And I don't know whether it's the same family or not, but my husband's family was very close to the Gelinos, who had early on an African-American themed greeting card company. I don't know if it was that early, but I am thinking of the fact that many people that we knew or know have tried hard to start their own businesses, and with all kinds of obstacles placed in their way. I've been trying to find out about our grandfathers, our maternal grandfather's family back in Richmond. I understand that they may have had a taxi cab or hackney service in Richmond many, many, many decades ago. I haven't been able to pin that down, but I know your cousin and my sister looking into that. Carol Joy Creations, yes, that's the gentleman. Now, somebody has written a comment. Was that Carol Joy Creations? Do you remember the name of the card company? Was it Carol Joy?
No, it was Color Tone. And again,
Okay.
this was back in the 1950s.
Okay.
So I don't think that Carol Joy was operating then.
Okay.
But this I remember specifically. This was the cards were called Color Tone. Now,
Okay.
who made them? I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I was an 8-year-old kid, so I don't remember, who was behind it. But I know it was Christmas cards that were geared toward, the African American folks. Negroes, as we used to say back in those days.
Right, exactly. But it was Carol.
White folks that made it. To be honest with you, I don't know.
It was Carol Joy that I was thinking of. Now, let me ask you this: we have a question coming in. Have you had your African ancestry traced?
Yes, I have. Are
you willing to share?
Yes, on my mother's side and your mother's side, we found out that our ancestors are the Fulani.
Right.
Fulani people from Nigeria.
Right.
So I'm very proud of that fact.
Mm-hmm.
And, one of the things that I always point out to people when we're talking about financial literacy and we're talking about Black entrepreneurship, and we're constantly inundated with this information about the wealth gap and how basically when you look at the numbers in the wealth gap that the black folks don't really have anything compared to other people. And I like to say that that's not necessarily true. If you feed somebody this kind of information constantly and they don't know any better, they will start to believe that, and that leads to an inferiority mentality. So I don't necessarily buy into that. Mm-hmm. I say that we as African Americans, as Black folks, we have money. We just have not used our money intelligently. We have not used our money so that it can make more money for us. But we have the ability, and we do make money. We have, the wealth factor of the African American community is greater than some small countries. So we just have to be directed into how to use that money more intelligently. Mm-hmm. And I always remind people whenever I'm doing a financial planning or financial literacy conversation, I remind people that the wealthiest person in the history of the world is not Jeff Bezos. It's not Zuckerberg. It's not Elon Musk. It was Mansa Musa, an African king from the Mali Empire. Mansa Musa was the richest man in the history of the world. If you Google just that, the richest person in the history of the world, that's what you will find, Mansa Musa. So I like to think that genetic memory can kick in and take us back to a time, or not take us back, but have us build on that and get back to a point where we can be in that kind of status again. Mm-hmm. I don't want to close the racial wealth gap. I want to crush it. I want it not to exist at all. I want us to be at the top of the spectrum. I don't wish any bad things on anybody else, but I want us to be the example of the best that there is and the wealthiest that there is, and use that wisely. Mm-hmm. So that we never fall back again into that situation. Look at our history. When the doors are open up to us, we usually become the best at whatever it is. Look at yourself, Judy. I'm so proud of you, cousin. You have risen you are the top of your field, working in the government and working close to presidents and the things that you've done, have been fantastic. And this is the case with us. Going back to the youth, when you don't waste your time and you use your time intelligently and you use the potential that God has given you, which you have done, Judy, when you do that, you can rise above all the obstacles that you'll have. And you're going to have obstacles. Everybody in life has trials. You can't get away from that. It's not going to be a bed of roses at all. There's always going to be some kind of trials. There's always going to be some kind of problems and obstacles. So what you have to do is you have to be able to get over those obstacles. It's not going to be a bed of roses at all. There's always going to be some kind of trials. There's always going to be some kind of problems and obstacles. So what you have.
I think Jerome was.
I thought that was Jerome telling me, okay, you need to stop now.
No, well, perhaps it was, but this has been really a wonderful conversation. And I think your comment about access to opportunity and making sure that we all have access to some sort of financial literacy education is key to taking advantage of the talents that we all have and all have the capacity to develop. So I have enjoyed being the host for this interview, and I thank Jerome and you for inviting me to do this. Jerome, are you trying to get us to stop or what?
No, I'm trying to get rid of the echo. I think I've got another device on. I was listening to another device, but I want to thank both of you, Judy, for the interview. My brother says when I do the interviews, when my sister Faye does the interviews, people come away with how people feel. And when I do the interviews, people come away with how people think. I think when you do the interviews, you come away with a deep richness of the person who's talking, to be able to draw out all the important points. So I thank you for that. And then Hassan, one of my sisters, Susie, she commented on the post here, but apropos to your statements and giving advice, she has this saying that we want to break the intergenerational curse and build intergenerational wealth. Yes. And I think that summarizes much of what you were talking about. We don't have to be where we are. We can turn it around if we use our time wisely. I think that's a great conversation across generations and a great bit of advice for not only your grandchildren, but all the grandchildren of our community. So thank you very much. So,
and may I, Jerome, yeah. May I just take this opportunity to congratulate Hassan's children and grandchildren for having such a wonderful role model in Hassan.
Yes, nice role model.
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you very much. I love both of you, and thank you for inviting me to be on this platform.
Thank you. And I'm inviting everybody next week. It's our first anniversary, June 8th, of What's on Jerome's Mind. And we're going to have a virtual dance party, the Groove Line with Maria Broom, and we're going to rattle, rock, and roll our hips. So tune in and come join us. And Maria out of Baltimore leads the world in terms of using movement to keep our body, minds, and soul and spirit balanced. And join us again on next Tuesday, the 8th of June. And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.